Welcome back, fantastic friends and fans, to the 12th episode of the Fancast at 4 podcast. My name is Dan Bettenhausen, and I'm your host as we venture into the what-ifs of Marvel's first family, who will be appearing in Phase 6 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. As we wait to hear who will be behind the camera for the Fantastic Four's introduction, we still can explore what it would be like if a different director was behind the camera, and who might they cast. If you are new to the podcast and want to hear a brief history of the Fantastic Four, you can check out our first episode, where guest Pat Bolfamonte provides a breakdown of each of the characters. Now let's dive right in and meet this episode's guest and see what they have in store for us. For this episode, I'm very excited to have the Egg Lord herself, Nicki Baldwin, join us. Nicki, welcome to the podcast. Please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Dan. Firstly, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited, but also a little intimidated to be on just because you've had so many fantastic guests so far. I mean, not too much excitement about me. Obviously, we're both film fans, which is part of how we've gotten to know each other. I'm a huge Disney and Pixar fan in particular, which might lend itself to this episode's director.
No spoilers.
I'm not very good about keeping secrets, but I mean, that's the bulk about me. I've participated in Disney and Pixar trivia in the past, but otherwise, not too much exciting about me, but I'm excited to get into this.
Well, with that said, we can dive right in. For this week, the director we are discussing is an American animator, film director, screenwriter, producer, voice actor, and chief creative officer of the aforementioned Pixar Studios. He has been nominated for 9 Oscars and has won 3 for Best Animated Feature, making him the first person in history to win the category 3 times. He is self-described as a geeky kid from Minnesota who likes to draw cartoons. This week, we are featuring Pete Docter. Nicki, when you hear the name Pete Docter, what comes to mind?
I just think of a master when it comes to animated film. As I said earlier, I obviously love Disney and Pixar, and I think he honestly has a huge part in that because from what I've read about just the founding of Pixar and just the history, he's been there literally since the beginning. I can't remember his exact role, but he's been with the company and working on the films as early as the original Toy Story. Right. And he... and this might sound like a bit of an overstatement, but all 4 of his films are in my top 10 for Pixar, pretty easily, with one of them being number 1. So I very much think pretty highly of his work. And just the stuff I've read about him, I mean, you already said off the top, a geeky kid from Minnesota. Just from the stuff I've read about him, he's a child at heart. Apparently one of his first big purchases after he started working at Pixar was a cotton candy machine. And that's the kind of vibrance I love to see in these films and just that creativity. And since he's taken the reins as chief creative officer, he's also been trying to have a bigger hand in having more diverse voices. He, from what I've read, mentored Domi Shi, the director of Turning Red. So I love the direction that they're going in. It's only a shame that now he's not directing as much as he used to.
Yeah, that is usually what comes with the more responsibility. You have more direction of people, more so than direction of film. But I think I've probably been a bigger fan of some of these more recent Pixar films than other people have been. So I'm very happy with how he's kind of steered Pixar Studios. But like you said, for his actual directing endeavors, he has some pretty iconic films in that filmography. I think that's actually a great segue into our segment I like to call 4 Fantastic Films, where we take 4 films that each director has directed and discuss them briefly. Fortunately for us, Pete Docter makes it easy. As far as films he's directed, there are 4 of them. So the first one I want to talk about was his first Pixar directing venture, 2001's Monsters, Inc. What do you think about Monsters, Inc.?
Oh, man. I remember seeing it for the first time in theaters as a child. I would have been around 7 at the time. So very much my age group that was going out to see them. And I just remember at the time, like, it was just so funny. And looking back on it as an adult, it holds up so amazingly well. Because it has, when you really think about it, a little bit of an intricate world building when you put it on paper, but it feels so natural because it's basically the real world, but with monsters. But then you literally are going into their energy source and how they harvest it, which that sounds daunting for children to have to consume and conceptualize, but they make it work so well because, and I'm probably going to say this a lot going as we go through the filmography, but it feels just so human, ironically, at the
Right,
same time.
right.
These characters feel like real people. You have Mike, who is just an absolute blast, I could get into so much about this movie. The performances, especially by Billy Crystal, like the snappy one-liners, just even like the dumb little joke of he's in the commercial, but he's being covered by a logo, like little stuff like that. Like it works so well. And then of course you have Sully, who's just such a big teddy bear with such an amazing performance by John Goodman and Boo. If I have a young child, I want Boo to be their very first Halloween costume, or maybe by the time they're two. But I just I can't speak enough about this movie.
Oh yeah, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. This movie works because of John Goodman and Billy Crystal's dynamic together.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not believable as friends, this movie doesn't work. You also have a great
Mm-hmm.
turn by Steve Buscemi as Randall, the kind of antagonist, or at least one of the antagonists in the film. And you said, despite this being a movie about monsters, it's about you could put in people in this, and it's like a day in the life of these creatures going to work, what their everyday
Mm-hmm.
life is. And one thing Pixar does very well is kind of give us a lesson that's not so heavy-handed. And
Mm-hmm.
in some regards, this film is about facing your fears, pun very much intended, at least within the theme of the film. And while Boo, throughout most of the movie, is a very brave character, she's still kind of our window into this world as the only actual human character. And for a movie that has had a sequel in the Pixar filmography, I still think it's one that flies under the radar, which
Oh yeah.
which is too bad because it's really great. I'm not saying people underrate it. I just think people forget about it sometimes.
And I think you really hit the nail on the head with mentioning just the strength of Sully and Mike and their dynamic. Because I don't think like Pete Docter did not direct it, but I don't think Monsters University works if you don't have as great of characters as them. So I think you made a really good point with that.
For his second film, I'm going to spoil a little. I know this is a favorite of yours. In 2009, he directed the Pixar classic Up. I'm going to sit back, let you talk about Up.
Oh my God. I'm going to try so hard to not just make this an entire up podcast, but I will try, but I can't promise anything. But this is possibly, and I'm not even exaggerating, this is one of just my favorite films of all time. And maybe there's a little bit of bias because at the time I saw it, I mean, Pixar was on a roll in the 2000s. That's basically, I think, what a lot of people consider the golden age. And so it was like every next movie was my favorite. And at the time when Up came out, it did become that. But again, looking back on it, especially as an adult, it still hits so hard. And I know the cliche is the 10 minutes are the best part of the movie and the rest like is nothing, which before I get into that, yes, the first 10 minutes do happen to be the best part of the movie and are just so effective in just the way that they portray these characters without words, but with an incredibly gorgeous Giacchino score, Oscar-winning score, by the way.
Yep.
And like you just instantly get invested in compared to monsters, these completely normal people. Like that's literally all Carl and Ellie are. But it's so sweet and it's so simultaneously funny and heartbreaking as they just kind of go through the motions. But then when you do get into the film itself, again, I think a lot of what works for it is I do think a lot of the humor does work. I personally love the dogs. I think Russell is pretty sweet and just his awkwardness, but he's so earnest in how he wants to help out Carl. You can't ignore just how iconic the balloons just being revealed and the house floating up. I would argue next to the ball and Luxo Jr., the Pixar lamp, that has to be one of the most iconic Pixar images just of all time. And then, like, for me, the adventure is fun and the heartbreak when Carl sees what Ellie had left behind for him to encourage him to have his own adventure. It's just, oh, I love this movie so much.
you touched on something I was going to say as far as the balloons. That is one of the most stunning shots, I think, even to this day,
Mhm.
after how long Pixar's been around, many films there have been after Up. The balloons bursting out from the top of the house, lifting it up, straining to lift it up, is quintessential Pixar. And I remember the first time watching that and how in awe I was of all these balloons taking this house away. So no, I'm with
Mhm.
you there.
And what's crazier is like that's a trailer shot and it was still that effective in the movie itself. That
Right.
to me is what speaks to its strength more than anything.
And like Monsters Inc., this movie is very reliant in a good way on its two leads. It's Carl and it's Russell, and the dynamic between the two of them is very sweet. Despite Carl being kind of a pseudo father figure for Russell, I think it really works. I will admit I am not as high on this film. It is a top half Pixar movie for me for
Mhm.
sure. I do think it is propped up by the first 10 minutes, but I don't think that first 10 minutes is doing as much heavy lifting as a lot of critics would say it is. I think the relationship is very strong. I'm not as big a fan. I think Charles Muntz is one of the weaker antagonists among
Mhm.
Pixar villains. So I think that's probably where my criticism comes in, is that the villain isn't so strong, but the
Mhm.
relationship between Carl and Russell is very sweet, very endearing, and I certainly go back and rewatch this film by all means. I'm not as high on it, again, pun intended, as you certainly are. But again, zero disrespect to your opinion. I very much value what you have to say about it and understand where you're coming from. His third film, now we jump a few more years out to 2015 to one that I'd call a pretty big gut punch in Inside Out. Nicki, how does Inside Out rank among the Pete Docter films, among Pixar films for you? How do you classify it? How do you feel about Inside Out?
So this is it's funny to me because we're now kind of flipping it a little bit.
Yeah,
I'm not compared to a lot of other people, and I hate that I'm not higher on this movie personally. No longer pun intended since it's not up. But first of all, let me just say I do think Inside Out is a great film, and I think in terms of the positive, it's very inventive. I mean, people can make the Herman's Head reference however many times they want. It's inventive in the way it portrays it and the way the characters are designed, and just how I love the designs of the characters. They're over. You could say they're overly simplistic, but it just kind of works for them conceptually because it is a high concept movie when you think about it. I think the designs of just kind of the inner recesses of Riley's mind are absolutely stunning. I like I like kind of the message it's just trying to portray is the importance of not hiding your emotions, not trying to just kind of single-mindedly focus on one aspect of yourself and not letting the rest of it come through. And that, look, every aspect of your identity and your feelings are just as valid as anything else, and they're also just necessary because if you are just happy all the time, then it kind of just makes everything a little bit meaningless. And I think that's a good lesson. And honestly, like this movie has like some pretty good jokes in it. Or I think I'm not as high on it as most people is. I do love the emotions. I don't love them as lead characters though, because for me they can get in their one dimensional by design characterization. For me, sometimes gets a little bit grating. I'm also not the biggest Bing Bong fan. I know that's like heresy to say in a Pixar conversation. But again, I think it's a really great movie. I think a lot of kind of the jokes and the way it portrays the inside of our minds and like, oh, this is why you get a song stuck in your head. This is how you have dreams. I think a lot of that's very inventive. And I do love the story of Riley. I kind of just wish we had a little bit more of her in it.
yeah. No, I can't say I disagree with your last point there. I do think the voice cast chosen to portray
Mm-hmm.
each emotion was spot on. Amy
Oh
Poehler
yeah.
is joy, Mindy Kaling as disgust. We got Lewis Black as anger, Bill Hader as fear, and
As,
then an unsung hero I really think is Phyllis Smith as sadness. Phyllis Smith, who plays Phyllis in The Office, and I think this movie probably dropped down in my rankings some since I first saw it. I do think it plays a very kind of black and white picture about emotion, even as Riley evolves and is having her
mm-hmm.
emotions acknowledged. I wish there was a little more introspection into how emotions aren't just happiness, but how how happiness and sadness can be like melancholic and have that
Mm-hmm.
explored a little bit more and not so black and white. Bing Bong, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that was emotional terrorism by Pixar, to be quite honest with you. To be fair, I do really like it. I think it is an important movie, though, especially for children.
Mm-hmm.
As an adult watching Inside Out, that's where I'm coming at more with my critique. But I still think it's important for kids who are watching this to start being okay about asking about their emotions and being okay being sad and having your parents talk to you about being sad or happy or angry or disgusted,
Mm-hmm.
allowing yourself to investigate the feelings that make you you.
No, 100%. And you also hit on the performances. I think what does strengthen the film is a lot of the individual elements are so insanely good, like just kind of on their own. And as much as I poo poo on the movie, it is still in my top 10. It's at the
Yeah,
bottom of
yeah.
my top 10, but it is in my top 10.
Hey, fair enough. Last but not least is a film that came out during the pandemic, 2020's Soul. This was, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, was this the first Disney Plus original release or was that Luca?
It was the first that was
Okay.
exclusive. So Onward had come out like just as COVID hit. So it did technically appear in theaters. Soul
Okay.
was
That's right.
exclusive to Disney Plus.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, and Luca was after that. You're right. You're right. Cool. Talk to me about Soul. Where does Soul fit in your ranking? What are your thoughts, feelings, views on the movie Soul?
So I'll just say out the gate, I'm a little bit biased towards it in a very positive way because it came out literally on Christmas and I watched back to back Wonder Woman 84 and then this movie. So I do not have a high bar for it to reach at the time. But at the same time, I watched it with both of my parents and they both really enjoyed it, including my dad who did not care about animated movies to save his life. So they both got really invested in just Joe as a character. And I think what really attracts me to Soul as much as I am to it is the fact that I would say it's not even just among Pete's movies, just Pixar and Drill. It's very mature in a lot of its themes. It's about an adult man who has dreams that he wants to achieve, but is also bogged down by kind of the realities of life. And should he go the more practical route? His mom's kind of nagging him on what to do with himself, even though he wants to be a musician. And then seemingly has all that taken away from him in the blink of an eye and is thrust into this new reality that he wasn't even aware of before, just kind of seeing how people's identities and passions are developed. And honestly, a lot of it really works for me. I don't think the movie is perfect, but I felt a very good connection with a lot of its themes because I could, not that I have like these glorious ambitions as Joe does, but I can completely relate. He's conflicted, like he wants to do this. And then just the reality of when he does achieve it is like, oh, like he has his big high. And then it's like, but wait, then there's still the rest of life. Like there's the rest of like just the mundanity of it. There's like pizza as we see just the enjoyment that 22 gains from it, from trying it for the first time. A lot of the movie, it's about life purpose, but it's also about the smaller things in it. And I think that's what works well for me. I also love the Grateful Four personally. I think the Jerrys are hilarious. I think Terry's a great character. I think the little baby souls are so stinking cute. So for me, I would say it doesn't emotionally hit as hard as I would have liked, but just as a film, I think I do like the themes. I think that's what kind of differentiates it a lot from other Pixar films, and it works very well for me.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if as far as the positives as reviewing it, I have anything more critical or introspective to say about the movie. I wish I liked it more than I did. I didn't hate it, but I would say it is in the top half of the bottom half of my rankings.
Yeah, and honestly, even on my last rewatch, I completely understand why it doesn't work for everyone. Again, I think compared to other films, it doesn't have the gut punch. I don't personally mind 22. I actually thought I was going to dislike her way more than I did, and I found her tolerable. But I'm not invested enough in her to care about her kind of big emotional moment near the end, so that I get. I think for me it's more that the specific themes resonate. On the whole though, there are parts of the movie like the body swap, like I don't mind, but I completely get why other people cannot stand it. But I do want to say before we wrap up, I'd be remiss to not mention the music. I mean, this
Music, yes, 100. That is certainly a high point in this movie. The music is stunning. Zero notes about that. to the negative. And this is spoil for those who haven't watched Soul. I am going to spoil the ending. I think the big issue I had was with the ending. I think I might have liked a lot of what came before more if Joe had stayed dead. For a studio that isn't afraid to touch on tough subjects, it felt strange giving Joe, who had died in the movie, a second chance when there was other ways to get across that message, maybe to his students, maybe to other people in his life, about living your best life through the memory of Joe rather than giving him the second chance. Didn't hate it. Again, it is a Pixar, it is a kids movie, but I think for, again, a studio that isn't afraid to go there in a lot of ways, it felt a little bit of a cop-out.
It did for me, more so because it also felt a little anticlimactic, because we also don't kind of see how he's changed from the experience. Like, we can certainly make inferences to it, and I think that might have been their intention. And I don't personally hate it, but again, I've heard other people say it, and I do agree that it probably would have had a much bigger impact had that happened instead.
Well, I'm glad we're on the same page there. You know what? Being on the same page, I think we should turn the page to our next segment, which is what you've all been waiting for, our fantastic castings. Here, this is where each of us will go through our list of casting a Fantastic Four film, and then we'll follow it up with our pitch. So, Nicki, who is your Fantastic Four cast?
Okay, so this was a little bit tough because, as you could probably have noticed when you looked at the filmography, compared to some of the other directors, it was a little more limited. And then I think this is the first time, and correct me if I'm wrong, animated director though. So I would say for me though, the one benefit was I'm looking at this as from the point of view of doing an animated movie. So there's also a little more creative liberty with that. So that was something I was also excited to do. So looking at it from that point of view, I was very excited to do the casting. And there are some people that jumped out, others that didn't. But to get started, for my Reed Richards, I decided to go with Fear himself, Bill Hader, as directed by Pete Docter in Inside Out. He was honestly one of the hardest for me to cast, but I think what made Bill Hader is I liked a little bit of the frenetic energy he brought to Fear, and I think for my portrayal of Reed that I'm going to get into, I think that was going to work. But also did a lot of his other roles. I haven't really watched a whole lot of Barry, but I've been told a lot of things about it. I know Trainwreck. He has a bit of that straight man, but a bit of a quirky side to him at the same time, and like that kind of versatility under the guise of being a straight man. So I think that's what's going to work very well for what I have in mind for Reed.
What about your Sue Storm?
So for Sue Storm, this one I was very excited about. And as we're going to get into, I have some pretty deep cuts of people that Pete Docter has technically directed. But for my Sue Storm, I have Rashida Jones. So kind of before I get into this, for those who don't know, her work is in Inside Out as the voice of the emotions of the cool girl Riley is in class with. Kind of similar to a little bit of the Bill Hader aspect is very well known for Ann Perkins. I kind of want her to have kind of that appearance of the straight woman, but also weird, wacky side to her that just kind of comes out. She does very prolific, mostly with TV, but I'm kind of excited to have that aspect of her. I'm not familiar with a lot of her other film roles. I'll be honest, the first one I could think of was Tag, where she very much just kind of plays like the straight woman amongst the craziness. So that's kind of the angle I'm going with. So I'm excited for that.
What about her brother Johnny, the Human Torch?
I was way too excited to cast this person. So as Dan knows, I'm a huge musical fan. And when I realized I could cast this person, I was like, oh my God, I'm getting them in, and they would be a great Johnny. So for my Johnny Storm, I decided to go with Hamilton star, Tony Award winner, Daveed Diggs, who had the small role of Paul in Soul. I was so excited to be able to cast him because just kind of his portrayal of Jefferson in Hamilton, he's pretty over the top, and that's the kind of energy I wanted for my Johnny. And I haven't seen Daveed in a lot of other things. I've seen him in the film Wonder, which I think is an absolutely fantastic movie, but like just from everything I've seen him in, he's incredibly talented, and I'm excited for that energy to be brought to Johnny.
Last but not least, at least our hero family, who is your Ben Grimm, aka The Thing?
This is probably the one I'm most excited about, and I'm just gonna like pull the curtain a little bit. I very last minute told Dan, hey, I'm going to change my bet because I found the biggest possible loophole I could in casting. So we covered the 4 films that Pete Docter had directed. However, if we're talking about individuals he directed, for those who don't know, a little bit of trivia, he ADR directed the English dub of the Studio Ghibli film Howl's Moving Castle that I believe the English dub came out around 2004, 2005. And so another pretty deep cut. But for my Ben Grimm, I am going with the very prolific voice actor, Crispin Freeman, who, for those who have actually seen Howl's Moving Castle, had the small but important role of Turnip Head. For those who may be familiar with his voiceover work, he is Roy Harper and Will Harper in Young Justice. He's been in a lot of different anime, including Haruhi Suzumiya and Hellsing. And he's actually not a stranger to playing superhero roles. He's been Furio in an animated show. He's been Scott Lang before. And honestly, I've heard him in a menagerie of kinds of roles as the straight man, as someone who's a little bit crazier, as someone who's a superhero with powers. So I'm just so excited I can cast him in this.
So we have your 4 Fantastic Four team members. What about their nemesis, Dr. Doom?
So this was, besides Reed, this was probably the single hardest. But I wanted to go for someone that could be sinister, but also have the capacity to go in different directions, which is, again, going to play into the way I have Doom portrayed in my movie. But I'm going with Pixar regular Bob Peterson. You may know from roles such as Roz from Monsters, Inc. and Doug and Alpha from Up. So obviously, if you've heard any of those voices, you know they sound absolutely nothing alike. And that's the point of my version of Doom that I'll be portraying.
Okay, that really interesting cast. Did not see the Howl's Moving Castle casting coming. Came out of left field there, but that's the fun thing about this show. You can be creative, have a little fun, and I know you as an anime and a Miyazaki fan certainly does not surprise me that you pulled that into a Pete Docter casting as well. So now let's dive into my list before we get to our pitches. For me, I took a lot of liberty, especially since we are venturing into the anime section, something we have not explored on this podcast yet. So for Reed Richards, I am flipping the gender here on this and going with a female for Mrs. Fantastic. And I'm casting someone who played a very maternal figure in Inside Out. She is also known by Martha in Batman versus Superman. I am casting Diane Lane. For this Reed Richards, I want someone who is very maternal, has a very protective sense about her. And though she hasn't showed anyone with superpowers in previous roles, she is someone who I think could certainly voice a female lead protagonist in this film I will soon be pitching.
Oh no, that's an awesome choice.
Thank you. For my Sue Storm, I am in my head. I'm envisioning a younger character, maybe teenage age, and there really wasn't anyone that felt more perfect than tapping back into Inside Out. The Office's own Mindy Kaling. I think she certainly could voice a teenage girl. That's essentially was the emotion she kind of played in Inside Out, discussed there. So I really could not think of anyone better to play the Sue Storm I wanted in this film. I wouldn't say when I think teenage girl, I think Mindy Kaling, but I certainly think she has, in her past, in her other acting experience, shows that she could play off that sassy teenage girl very easily. For Johnny Storm, same deal. I want this character to be even younger, so maybe preteen age. And I'm going with a relative unknown. He was an uncredited role as a young soul in Soul. I'm going with a kid named Pierce Nation. Like I said, really not a ton about him. He's had a few parts here and there, but really I want him to play a young child. And it's hard for an older male actor to do that in a lot of ways. So that's why I wanted to go with give this kid a chance to continue his voice acting career as Johnny Storm. For my Ben Grimm, I am going into one of my favorite Pixar roles, going back to Monsters, Inc., and I'm going to cast John Goodman. I think John Goodman has played both very paternal, which is what I kind of want from this Ben Grimm. He's also been very tough. If you've seen something like 10 Cloverfield Lane, he's been a very scary character too. And that's kind of the dichotomy of Ben Grimm. He is very loving, cares about his family, is very protective, but also when it comes down to getting into a fight, he will throw some punches. And I think John Goodman can play both sides of that. And I really want that fatherly aspect to come out. And I really couldn't think of someone any better, at least who's worked with Pete Docter before. That no one's better than John Goodman.
I was gonna say, that's amazing. I was so close to picking him because he's that amazing.
It's never a bad choice picking John Goodman. The only crossover, at least among our main cast, is here. It's not the same actor playing this character, but I am using an actor you've picked before to play Doctor Doom. I'm going with Bill Hader for my Doctor Doom. And you touched on it a little bit. Actually, why I picked him as Doctor Doom was his role in Barry. I want someone who is very methodical, but is also very emotional. And that's the Doom I'm portraying in this film I'm pitching. Someone who can come off very smart, can be the smartest person in the room, but can also have that flip switched and be this psychopath. And and again, from Barry and some other roles he has, there's an inner rage that Bill Hader has played before that works perfectly what I have in mind with the Doom that will be in this film.
That's great. I love it.
I find it interesting that we have Bill Hader in kind of the diametric roles as far as you have him as Mr. Fantastic, I have him Doom. Though in some ways, one bad day for either of those characters, or one good day if you're talking about Doom, might have flipped the script on both of them. So I think that's why it works so well to have him in either role. So there you have that's our casts. A lot of interesting choices. I'm very interested to see where Nicki goes with her pitch. With that said, it's time to pitch our Fantastic Four movie directed by Pete Docter. But Nicki, before I let you go, I have two questions. Is your film an origin film?
Yes.
Okay. Is it part of the MCU?
Definitely not.
Would be very strange if it were. I would be all for it, but it doesn't surprise me that what I'm presuming is an animated film is not going to be part of the MCU. But hey, what if exists, and that is part of the MCU?
By all means, there was a version of mine where I did think about I could easily incorporate the Watcher if I really wanted to.
Okay, well, let's hear your pitch.
Okay. As you know, this is the part of the episode I'm the most nervous about. But I'm gonna try to live up to the other wonderful pitches you've had. Okay, so here it goes. And the part that sucks the most about this is I want the listeners to envision this in the 3D whimsical Pixar style, because a lot of what would enhance the movie is a lot of that visual storytelling and some of the visual gags and just the portrayal of their powers. Obviously, I am not an artist, and this is an audio podcast, but I want you to try to have that in your minds as you listen. Okay, so the way the story is set up is we have so first of all, the film itself is called Fantastic, just plain fantastic. So the setup of the film is we have our four protagonists who we call them Marvel's first family. And in this case, they are a family in this scenario, not necessarily biological, but the way that we are kind of familiar with them. We have Reed, who is a scientist who tends to stretch himself a little too thin day to day. He's a workaholic, but he also wants to keep up with all his family obligations. And it kind of drives everyone else insane sometimes. You have Sue, his loving wife, who's a scientist herself, but as a child, because she was so intelligent and a prize, Franklin had kind of pushed her a little bit too much into the limelight, to the point to where even though she's very dedicated and serious about her work, she kind of just wants to be out of the spotlight. She wants to be a little more hidden than she used to be, and is a little bit more timid as a result of all those years of kind of being pushed a little bit to a point of discomfort just in front of others' eyes. Then you have her little brother, Johnny, who's a rambunctious young man, can't hold down a job, literally the polar opposite, due to some of his own jealousy and other feelings that he hasn't really dealt with being in his sister's shadow. He acts out. He is a hothead. He gets heated easily. He's, as I said, kind of rambunctious, bit of a ladies' man. He just wants attention and will go to a lot of lengths to get it, to the frustration of everyone else, even though they do love him. And then you have none other than our sweet Ben Grimm, who is Reed's best friend, but is also the opposite in a lot of ways. He kind of grew up on the rough side of town. He kind of developed this hard demeanor, but it's all, at the end of the day, he has a heart of gold. It's kind of, but he masked it because he feel like he has to, because he's just so used to just having to be tough, had to like protect himself when he needed to. And he's kind of dealing with that. And all the while, he's working as a security guard for the lab that Reed and Sue work for, and just also doesn't really know how to grapple with his own identity. And then you also have Reed's incredibly jealous and petty compatriot, Victor Von Doom, who is incredibly superficial, as you would say, kind of the opposite in a lot of ways, even though he's as intelligent, if not maybe more so than Reed. He also puts on kind of a phony persona because he wants to win over everyone around him, and is in some ways is a bit electrifying, as you might say. So one day, Reed and Sue are working late, and Reed, being the wonderful, kind-hearted best friend of Reed's, comes to bring them dinner. And Johnny comes in having his own situation with a girl that he's now bitching to everyone about. All the while, that pisses Ben off because he's just kind of bothering everyone. And then all of a sudden, this portal that Reed has been working on inexplicably, that no one really understands how it works, all of a sudden just randomly flickers on. And Victor's like kind of off to the side. I'm just kind of watching this. But anyways, all of a sudden, the four of them find themselves sucked into a portal and transported into a world that you might describe as negative, maybe not as much of a world as maybe a zone. I don't know, but all they know is that it's dreary, it's depressing, and basically like the worst place they could possibly find themselves in. And they don't know where they could possibly be. But all the while, there's these little beings that are kind of just hopping around, kind of envision like the little souls or even the emotions, like these little personifications of one of fire, one of rock, one of like just kind of energy, and one that's just kind of like bouncing around, and they're all just kind of going all over. And then the group, trying to just find out where the hell they are approached by none other than this very intimidating, tall, galactic appearing man who you might know as a nihilist. And he's asking, hey, what the hell are you all doing here? And they don't know where the hell they are, to which he explains to them that he is in the negative zone and that he's currently feuding with the other potential ruler of the negative zone, Blastar. And then in order to wage war about him, he extracts all of his negative feelings into these little beings that he then sends after them, to which Blastar then shows up and gets pissed at him in order to take his claim to the negative zone. So as the two of them are bickering, not really so much as fighting, the little rock guy that we see earlier finds himself caught underneath a tree. And Ben, being the wonderful man with a heart of gold that he has, goes to save him. And all of a sudden, the little guy's like, wow, mister, you're really great. I'm going to follow you back. And then his three little friends come and follow them back as well, just as the nihilist sends them back to their home. And then they all find that these negative aspects of themselves, as a result of being in the negative zone, have now been personified to the natural extreme that they possibly could have been. Reed can now suddenly stretch, and Sue can make herself invisible, and Johnny can now be literally a hothead on fire. To which all of them are like, oh, cool, we can all now do literally exactly what we want in the coolest ways possible. And if you're asking about how does Johnny get helped by having fire powers, he can be a social media celebrity, which is exactly what he wants. But Ben is now the monster that he's always wished that he wouldn't be able to be. And while the other three are all kind of embracing their powers and their roles, he's struggling the way that you can imagine a guy turned into a hulking rock monster would be now. So as the others kind of get a little bit overly caught up in the benefits of their powers, he kind of decides to go back to Yancey Street and then decides to find ways to kind of use his powers for the greater good as much as he can, helping the little bullied kids out, and just doing any kind of odd job here or there that he can find. And then all of a sudden he kind of realizes, hey, like, this sucked, but you know what? Like, I could actually use this in a beneficial way. And while Ben's kind of rediscovering himself and seeing the benefit to his power, the others start doing not so hot. Johnny, being as reckless as he is, there's this thing called arson that he accidentally does. Sue, in her desperation to become invisible, hey, guess what? If you're invisible, you can't go to work. So that's not going to work out very well. And then Reed is just tied up in knots constantly in his attempts to do as much as he possibly can. To which Ben eventually goes back and finds a way to go back into the negative zone to try and to get Annihilus to take the powers back from them. To which Annihilus points out in his rage, as he's also trying to keep off Blastar, yeah, I can take this from you, but you're still going to have to live with the worst parts of yourself no matter what, powers or not. To which Ben has the epiphany that, look, we all have the negatives and the positive parts of ourselves. It's just the way that we view them and the way that we use them. He then goes back to his found family and he helps them out, and he kind of helps them kind of see what they need to do in order to live with their problems and just the most effective ways of dealing with them. And then yada yada yada, happily ever after. Or is it? Still creeping in the negative zone is our friend Victor, who inexplicably also got sucked into it and has found himself at the brink of his superficiality. Oh, he's literally made of metal, as fake as humanly possible. And he's also not happy about it. And then who else does he come across but others who have been stuck in the negative zone, who also want to get out, and who maybe aren't as good of people as the Fantastic Four? You might say they're frightful. Wink.
Hey, I don't know what you were nervous about. That was a lot of fun. And like any Pixar film, it has a nice message that is good for kids. It has action and humor that's good for parents and adults. No, I think that was a really fun pitch. So well done. Nothing to
Oh my God, thank you. I appreciate it.
I'm going to say it again. That was a lot of fun. A lot of Marvel Easter eggs in there that we haven't gotten yet, and some other pitches. So yeah, totally sounds like you knew what you were doing. No help from anyone on the outside here. It was really great. Well done, Nicki.
I appreciate it. And obviously credit to him. I know more about just comics in general because of him. I never thought I'd know as much about the history of the Bat family, but honestly, I'm the better for it, though. So yeah, definitely, I appreciate it, and credit to him for all the knowledge he's bestowed upon me.
I have a lot to live up to now with my pitch, but I am very excited. Took me a long time to come up with this one. I think it's extremely original, something I haven't done before as far as my pitches go. I feel a very fresh take on the Fantastic Four. And similar to you, where you called yours, I believe, Fantastics, correct?
Yeah, just the word fantastic.
Fantastic. Mine is The Fantastics. It's the era of the superhero. The Thing and Mrs. Fantastic are two of the top crime fighters in the game. And even better, they're about to be married. While on his way to the wedding, the Thing is forced to deal with the typical superhero stuff. A young fanboy named Victor Von Doom shows up in the midst of his confrontation, demanding that he becomes the Thing's sidekick. The Thing refuses, but not before accidentally derailing a train. The Thing does end up saving the passengers, but for whatever reason, they decide to sue him. In response, the government enacts the Superhero Relocation Program, which bans heroes from using their powers and demands they anonymously rejoin society. So, the Thing is now Ben Grimm, and Mrs. Fantastic is now Reed Richards. They have two kids, Sue, who can turn invisible, and Johnny, who can fly and ignite himself on fire. Ben works at an insurance agency, and to put it frankly, he hates it. He still pines for his former life as a superhero, but how does he cope? He goes out on late-night crime-fighting runs with former superhero pal Iceman. We're going to get our first X-Men cameo here, who I have voiced by Daveed Diggs, who you had in your full original cast. However, this moonlighting does not go unnoticed by Reed. She's furious that Ben is reliving his glory days at the expense of his family. One day, Ben gets so frustrated with his job that he clobbers his boss through several walls with his super strength. So, of course, he's fired. However, the government lets him off the hook, but he doesn't tell Reed any of this. When he returns home that night, he finds a strange tablet in his bag that plays a video of a tantalizing offer from a woman named LaFay, who is voiced by Rashida Jones, also of your cast. She wants him to become the Thing again, to stop a rogue robot from destroying a secret government facility. His dream comes true. Ben tells Reed that he's going to an insurance conference and heads to the mysterious island where he easily defeats the robot dubbed the Doombot. Ben is revitalized when he returns home. He works out a bunch and even gets himself a sports car. Reed grows suspicious with this drastic change. She knows something is up when he heads off to another conference but in reality, he is heading back to the mysterious island for another job, where LaFay promises he will now meet the benefactor behind this mission. The benefactor is revealed to be the supervillain named Dr. Doom, once known as Victor. Brokenhearted by the Thing's rejection way back when, Victor turned his prodigious intellect to evil, building the Doombots and using them to kill a bunch of former superheroes. He then plans on releasing the Doombots into a city after defeating the Thing, then stopping the robots himself and pretending to be the hero. While the Thing is held prisoner by Dr. Doom, Reed, who has now figured out what's going on, leaps into action. She contacts the Tinkerer, a former superhero, then supervillain, then superhero costume designer, and learns that he has recently made a new costume for Ben. The Tinkerer is also played by Bob Peterson, who you have also mentioned before. I swear this is a big coincidence here. In a favor to the rest of his family, the Tinkerer makes costumes for the whole family. Dressed in their sleek new suits, Reed tracks down Ben's location with a homing beacon embedded in his costume before hopping into a jet to rescue him. Unbeknownst to her, there are two stowaways aboard, Sue and Johnny. She doesn't have much of a chance to get angry, however, because the jet is shot down by Dr. Doom. Ben hears this happen over the radio and assumes that his family is dead. However, they manage to survive, fortunately, and have sneaked onto Doom's island. There, Reed heads into the belly of the beast to save Ben, while the kids are instructed to stay behind and lay low. Reed rescues Ben, but not before Dr. Doom launches the Doombots into civilization. With the fearsome robots wreaking havoc in New York City, and Dr. Doom handedly bested by his own creation and unable to stop it as planned, the family rushes back to save the day. With the family now working as a team, the Doombots are no big deal at all. They take the robo-monsters out and return home. With their adventure behind them, this fantastic family is closer than ever. Ben and Reed have rediscovered their spark, Johnny is now allowed to play sports, and Sue now has the confidence to approach her crush. So, the family seems happy and content as they exit one of Johnny's track meets. However, they are met by a new supervillain, the suspicious Mole Man, voiced by John Ratzenberger, Pixar staple. Before you have a chance to say fantastic, the family already has their costumes on, showing that this superhero team-up was not just a one-time deal. And then, flashes across the screen, the Fantastics. And that is the pitch. What?
Dan?
You're speechless, right?
A little bit. That's a very familiar sounding plot summary. I can't imagine what.
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
It couldn't possibly have anything to do with the Pixar staple, The Incredibles, could it? Which, to be fair, is itself a Fantastic Four movie.
Wait, what?
You know, The Incredibles, about a family of superheroes. You have almost exactly those powers and that dynamic and that conflict.
Well, listeners, a little awkward here. Apparently, there's this movie called The Incredibles that was. You said Pixar did this as well?
Yeah, like 2004.
And it has similar plot?
Pretty much identical to what you just said.
Well, this is awkward, isn't it?
A little bit.
Huh. Well, you know what? If they already did it, great. I don't need to do it anymore. We already have a great film called what? The Incredibles, you said? Which, all seriousness, listeners, bit aside, The Incredibles is my favorite Pixar film, and arguably the best Fantastic Four movie we've gotten, despite not actually being the Fantastic Four. So I wanted to highlight it in my own special way. Nikki, what do you think about The Incredibles? Apparently the Fantastic Four.
I don't even think it's arguable. I think it kind of just is at this point. No, absolutely amazing movie. Definitely one of my own favorites from Pixar. So if that's the movie you want to see the Fantastic Four in, I don't blame you whatsoever.
Also, fantastic score by Michael Giacchino.
Yes.
Probably favorite film, favorite score. It is incredible, fantastic. Whatever, any adjective you want to give it, there are not enough words. Some inside baseball listeners, we initially were going to do Brad Bird, and then we changed recently to Pete Docter. We felt that would be a little better discussion, but I still want to talk about The Incredibles. I don't see us doing Brad Bird anytime soon. So if we were going to do a Pixar discussion, I wanted to make sure we touched on The Incredibles, and what better way to plagiarize a script?
My God. Hey, look, if you want to just take The Incredibles and plot the actual Fantastic Four characters into it, I'll still watch it. I
mean, it
promise.
works, kind of works. But
100%.
anyway, I think that's a good place to call it here. That is the end of our show. We've gone through our castings, our pitches for a Pete Docter helmed Fantastic Four movie. I think on behalf of Nicki, really hope that you, the listeners, enjoyed our exploration into this what if scenario. I want to make a special note that the Fancast at 4 podcast is hosted for free on Anchor. We encourage you, if you have your own podcast idea, to check it out. It is really a great resource for getting your idea off the ground. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If you are listening on YouTube, we would really appreciate you hitting that subscribe button and commenting with who your Pete Docter Fancast would be, on what your thoughts of our lists and pitches were, and on which director you might want us to do next. I want to thank Matt Hart and Maddie Gunner for the fantastic theme music they created for us, and I certainly want to thank you, Nicki, for being our guest today. I hope you had fun.
No, I had an absolute blast. I'm more than happy to have finally been able to be on the podcast and be able to talk about our pitches. My pitch technically, and just anything about Pixar and anything about these just amazing characters that I'm excited to see be done justice at some point in history.
Totally. Where can our listeners find you on the internets?
So you all can find me on Twitter at @EggLordNicki. I don't post a whole lot. Mostly it's to tweet about Yu-Gi-Oh! Of all things, but you can find me there. And then you can also find me doing the trailer reaction every now and then on the Montyverse YouTube channel. And thanks again, Dan, for having me on.
You're very welcome. And that is at the Montyverse on Twitter, the Montyverse on YouTube. I am myself a frequent guest on there as a reactor, as a reviewer, sometimes with Nicki as well. So I really encourage you to check out guest of the show, Pat Flamante's channel there. And with that, that's our show. Thank you so much for listening. I am your host, Dan Bettenhausen. And on behalf of my guest, Nicki Baldwin, I hope you all have a fantastic day.